Sometimes the only choice left is to choose nothing at all. England, 1825. The cliffs of Winterbourne rose from the churning sea below like jagged teeth, their ancient limestone faces worn smooth by centuries of salt spray and wind. Dawn had barely broken over the Devon coast, painting the sky in streaks of pale gold and lavender, when Cecilia Fairmont stepped to the very edge of the precipice. Her bare feet found purchase on the damp stone, her white nightgown whipping around her ankles in the morning gale that swept up from the waters below. She did not close her eyes. That would have been the act of a coward, and whatever else Cecilia Fairmont might be at 29, ruined and hopeless and desperate, she was not a coward. She had made her choice with clear eyes and a clear mind. In 3 days' time, she would be forced to wed Lord Crichton, a man of 60 years, whose previous 3 wives had all died under circumstances the Ton whispered about but never investigated. Her father's gambling debts had seen to that, had signed away her future as efficiently as if he had penned her death warrant himself. The wind tore at her unbound hair, sending the long chestnut strands streaming behind her like a banner. Below, the waves crashed against the rocks with a violence that should have terrified her. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. At least the sea would be quick. At least she would die on her own terms, not slowly, not at the hands of a brutal husband in some gilded cage of a marriage. The sound of hoofbeats on the coastal road penetrated her awareness, distant at first, then growing rapidly closer. Cecilia did not turn. She had perhaps a minute left of freedom, of choice, and she would not waste it on curiosity. "Seaborn!" The word hit her like a physical blow, freezing her in place as completely as if she had been turned to stone. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart, which had been beating with surprising calm, suddenly hammered against her ribs. That word, that impossible word that no one should know, that no one should ever speak again. She turned, her nightgown tangling dangerously around her legs, and saw him. Adrian Somerset, the Duke of Winterbourne, sat astride a massive black stallion on the cliff path, his dark hair dishevelled, his chest heaving as though he had been riding hard. Even from 30 feet away, she could see the terror in his blue eyes, could see the way his hands trembled on the reins. "Step back from the edge," he said, his voice rough with command and something else, something that sounded almost like pleading. Cecilia, step back. She had not heard her name spoken in that voice for 10 years. 10 years since she had last seen Adrian Somerset, since he had chosen duty and title over love, since he had married Lady Madeline, and disappeared from her life as completely as if he had died. "How dare you?" she whispered, though the wind carried her words away. More loudly, she said, "How dare you speak that word to me?" Adrian dismounted with swift grace, leaving his horse ground-tied. He moved toward her slowly, his hands raised as though approaching a skittish mare. "Cecilia, please. Whatever you are thinking, whatever has driven you to this, there must be another way." "Must there?" She laughed, a brittle sound that cracked in the middle. "Tell me, Your Grace, what other way exists for a woman with no fortune, no prospects, and a father who has sold her to the highest bidder? Or rather, to the only bidder willing to overlook the scandal of a family drowning in debt?" He stopped 10 feet away, near enough that she could see his face clearly now. He looked older than she remembered, harder somehow, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes and a tightness around his mouth that spoke of years of unhappiness. Good. She hoped he had been miserable in his grand marriage, in his perfect ducal life. "You could have come to me," he said quietly. The words were so absurd that for a moment Cecilia could only stare at him. Then fury, hot and cleansing, rushed through her veins. "Come to you? To the man who married another woman 3 months after swearing he loved only me? To the Duke of Winterbourne, who spent the last 10 years building his perfect life with his perfect duchess while I rotted away in my father's decaying house?" "Madeline is dead," Adrian said, and something in his tone made her falter. "She died 3 years ago. In childbirth, the baby died with her." The information registered dimly, tangled up with her own pain and anger. She should feel sympathy, she supposed. She should feel something other than this bitter satisfaction that his perfect life had not been so perfect after all. "I am sorry for your loss," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it, at least partially. "But it changes nothing. In 3 days, I marry Lord Creighton. My father has already signed the contracts. The debts will be settled, and I will become the 4th Lady Creighton. Unless you have £30,000 lying about and a sudden desire to rescue fallen women, Your Grace, I suggest you return to your morning ride and forget you saw me here." Adrian took another step closer. "Lord Creighton? Edmund Creighton?" "The same." Something dark and dangerous crossed Adrian's features. "The man is a monster. His wives did not die of natural causes, Cecilia. Everyone knows it, even if no one can prove it." "I know." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "That is rather the point of this morning's exercise. Better a quick death by my own hand than a slow one at his. No." The single word rang out with ducal authority. Adrian closed the remaining distance between them in 3 long strides, and before Cecilia could react, his hand closed around her wrist with gentle but unbreakable strength. "No, you are not doing this. Not now. Not ever. Not while I still draw breath." The touch of his fingers on her skin sent a shock through her system. It had been 10 years since anyone had touched her with anything resembling tenderness. 10 years since she had felt the warmth of another person's hand. Since she had known what it was to be seen, to be valued as something more than a burden or a bargaining chip. She tried to pull away, but he held firm, using his grip on her wrist to draw her back from the edge, to pull her towards safety even as she resisted. "Let me go," she demanded, hating the way her voice shook. "You have no right. I have every right." He spoke low and fierce, his face close to hers now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, could smell the scent of horse and leather, and something uniquely him that she had never forgotten. "I have the right of a man who has spent 10 years regretting every choice he made, every moment he did not fight for you. I have the right of a man who searched for you for 3 years, who only discovered your situation a week ago through the sheer chance of his solicitor hearing gossip at his club." Cecilia's resistance faltered. "Searched for me? Did you think I forgot?" Adrian's grip on her wrist shifted, became something closer to a caress. "Did you honestly believe I could forget you? Forget what we shared? Forget the woman I loved more than my own life? You married her." The accusation came out as a whisper. "You chose her." "I chose duty." Adrian's expression twisted with self-loathing. "I chose what my father demanded, what society expected, what honor required. And I paid for that choice every single day of a marriage that was a prison for both of us. Madeline knew I loved another. She knew, and it destroyed her as surely as the childbirth did." The confession hung between them, heavy with old grief and older guilt. Cecilia felt her anger crumbling, felt the careful walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. "Why did you say it?" she asked. "Why did you speak that word?" Adrian's free hand came up to cup her face, his palm warm against her cold cheek. "Because it was the only word that might reach you. Because it was the only word that meant anything. The only word that belonged only to us. Because 10 years ago we made a promise, Cecilia. We promised never to speak of Seabourn again unless we could be together. I am speaking it now. I am breaking that promise because I refuse to let you die before I have the chance to keep every other promise I made you." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, wanted to fall into the warmth of his touch, into the promise in his eyes. But she had spent 10 years learning that wanting something did not make it real, that love was not enough to bridge the vast gulf between a duke and the daughter of a bankrupt viscount. "You cannot save me," she said softly. "The contracts are signed. My father's debts are due. Even a duke cannot simply wave his hand and make £30,000 of gambling vowels disappear. Watch me." Adrian's smile was grim and full of promise. "I am the Duke of Winterbourne. I have more than enough money to settle your father's debts, more than enough influence to ensure Lord Creighton understands what will happen if he continues his pursuit of you. And what would you want in return? Cecilia could not keep the bitterness from her voice. Men like you do not give something for nothing. Would I simply trade one prison for another? Adrian's hand dropped from her face, but he did not release her wrist. He stood there, wind whipping his dark hair, dawnlight catching the angles of his face, and looked at her with an intensity that made her want to look away. I want the chance to court you, he said finally, properly this time, without secrets or stolen moments. I want the chance to prove that what we felt 10 years ago was not some youthful fantasy that has faded with time. I want the chance to make you trust me again, to make you believe that I will not fail you a second time. And if I refuse, she challenged, if I tell you to pay my father's debts and leave me alone, then I will do exactly that. His thumb traced a gentle circle on the inside of her wrist, right where her pulse beat rapid and unsteady. I will settle the debts. I will ensure you are provided for, and I will walk away if that is what you wish. But Cecilia, I am begging you not to make that choice. Not until you have heard everything I have to say. Not until you understand what truly happened 10 years ago. She should refuse. She should pull her hand from his grip, should walk away from the man who had broken her heart, should protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But Cecilia Fairmont had just been prepared to throw herself off a cliff, and suddenly the prospect of hearing Adrian Somerset's explanations seemed considerably less terrifying than death. Very well, she said, I will listen. But that is all I promise, Your Grace. I will listen. Adrian's hand tightened briefly on her wrist, and she saw something like relief flash across his face. That is all I ask. For now, will you come with me? Back to the manor. You are freezing, and we have much to discuss. It was only then that Cecilia realized she was shaking, whether from cold or delayed reaction, or the sheer overwhelming nature of the last 10 minutes, she could not say. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and allowed Adrian to lead her away from the cliff edge. As they walked toward his waiting horse, the sun finally crested the horizon, flooding the coastline with golden light. Cecilia glanced back once at the precipice, at the place where she had been ready to end everything. The waves still crashed below, indifferent to human drama, eternal and unchanging. She had chosen life. Now she would have to live with that choice, and with all the complications that Adrian Somerset's sudden reappearance would bring. She wondered if she would regret it, if in 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months she would wish she had simply stepped off that edge and let the sea take her. But as Adrian helped her onto his horse, as his strong arms came around her to hold her steady, as she caught the scent of him and felt the warmth of his body against her back, Cecilia allowed herself to hope, just for a moment, just enough to take the next breath, and then the next. The ride to Winterbourne Manor took less than 10 minutes, though to Cecilia it felt both eternal and far too brief. She sat before Adrian in the saddle, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the solid strength of him behind her. Neither spoke during the ride. What was there to say that had not already been said on that windswept cliff? The manor itself rose before them as they crested a small hill, and Cecilia caught her breath despite herself. Winterbourne Manor was everything the Fairmont estate was not. Prosperous, well-maintained, a testament to generations of careful stewardship rather than careless decline. The honey-coloured stone glowed in the morning light, and the gardens that surrounded it were obviously tended with loving care. This could have been hers, Cecilia thought with a pang, if Adrian had chosen differently. If she had been born to a different family, with a different fortune, if the world were other than it was. Adrian brought the horse to a halt before the main entrance, and a groom appeared immediately to take the reins. The young man's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Cecilia in her nightgown, but he was well trained enough to keep his expression neutral. "Prepare the blue guest suite," Adrian ordered, dismounting before reaching up to help Cecilia down. "And have Mrs. Winters send up hot water for a bath. Also, send word to Dr. Pritchard. I want her here within the hour." The groom bowed and led the horse away. Cecilia stood uncertainly on the gravel drive, suddenly very aware of her bare feet, her wind-blown hair, her thin nightgown that left little to the imagination in the bright morning light. She wrapped her arms around herself, not quite meeting Adrian's eyes. "Come," he said gently, and offered her his arm. "Let us get you warm and dry. Then we can talk." Cecilia took his arm because she had no other choice, and allowed the Duke of Winterbourne to lead her into his home. The entrance hall was everything she might have expected. Elegant without being ostentatious, filled with fine furniture and artwork that spoke of old money and older taste. Servants appeared and disappeared like ghosts, no doubt shocked by the sight of their master returning from his morning ride with a half-dressed woman, but all carefully keeping their opinions to themselves. Adrian led her up a sweeping staircase to the second floor, down a corridor lined with portraits of previous dukes and duchesses of Winterbourne. Cecilia recognized his late wife in one of the paintings, Lady Madeline, dark-haired and pale, with sad eyes that seemed to follow them down the hallway. She looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the weight of that painted gaze. The blue guest suite was as beautifully appointed as the rest of the house, with windows that overlooked the gardens and the sea beyond. A fire had already been lit in the grate, and servants were bringing in a copper bathtub and buckets of steaming water. Adrian stopped at the threshold, propriety finally catching up with necessity. "I will have Mrs. Winters attend you. She will bring clothing and anything else you need. When you are ready, I will be in the library downstairs. Take whatever time you require. We have much to discuss, but it can wait until you are comfortable." Cecilia nodded, still unable to quite believe that she was here, that she was alive, that Adrian Somerset was looking at her with 10 years of longing written plainly on his face. "Adrian," she said as he turned to leave, and it was the first time in a decade that she had spoken his Christian name aloud. He froze, turned back to her, with something close to hunger in his eyes. "Yes, thank you, for stopping me, for bringing me here. Whatever happens next, whatever you have to tell me, thank you for that much." His expression softened. "There is nothing to thank me for. I should have done this 10 years ago. I should have fought for you then. I will not make that mistake again." And with that promise hanging in the air between them, he left, closing the door softly behind him. 2 hours later, Cecilia descended the stairs of Winterbourne Manor, dressed in borrowed clothing that fit surprisingly well. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, had explained that the gowns had belonged to the late Duchess, carefully preserved in lavender and tissue paper. The deep green day dress Cecilia now wore brought out the colour of her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt almost like herself again, or perhaps like some better version of herself that might have existed in a different life. A young maid directed her to the library, where Adrian stood by the window overlooking the gardens. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It was the way he had looked at her 10 years ago, when the world had been young and full of possibility. "You look well," he said, his voice carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed him. "Your late wife's clothing fits me," Cecilia replied, moving further into the room. "Mrs. Winters was most helpful. Madeline would have been glad of it." Adrian gestured to a chair near the fireplace. "Please, sit. I have had tea brought, and Mrs. Winters assures me there are fresh scones. You must be hungry." She was, Cecilia realized. She had not eaten since yesterday afternoon, and the terror and exhaustion of this morning had left her hollow. She sat, accepted the tea Adrian poured for her, and waited for him to begin. He did not sit, but instead paced to the window and back, clearly struggling with where to start. Finally, he turned to face her, his expression grave. "I need to tell you about the last 10 years, he said. "About what happened after they took you away from Seabourn. About why I failed you. About why I searched for you. But first, I need you to understand that day we were separated. I wanted to die." The raw honesty in his voice made her set down her teacup with trembling fingers. "Adrian." "No, let me speak. You promised to listen, and I need to say this before I lose my courage." He ran a hand through his dark hair, disheveling it further. "Do you remember our first meeting? At the Haverton ball?" Despite herself, Cecilia felt a small smile touch her lips. "You stepped on my hem and tore my gown. I was trying to escape Lady Caroline's mother, who was determined to introduce me to her daughter for the 5th time that evening." Adrian's mouth quirked. "I fled straight into you, and instead of being mortified, you laughed. The memory surfaced with startling clarity. She had been 19, attending her second London season, with little hope and less enthusiasm. Her father's financial troubles were not yet common knowledge, but she had already learned that her modest dowry and unremarkable beauty would not attract the sort of husband her family needed. Then Adrian Somerset, already a duke at 25 after his father's sudden death the previous year, had careened into her, sending them both sprawling in an alcove where at least the damage was not witnessed by the entire ballroom. "You offered me your cravat to cover the tear," she said softly, "and you told me that no gentleman should be without his cravat, and that you would rather go home early than be responsible for my social downfall." Adrian's eyes were distant now, lost in the memory. "You were the first person in months who had spoken to me as though I were simply a man, not a title or a fortune or a prize to be won." "I did not know you were a duke," Cecilia admitted. "Not until you introduced yourself properly." "I know. That is why I fell in love with you in that moment, Cecilia. Because you saw me." The words hung between them, heavy with years of longing. Cecilia looked away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. "We exchanged letters," she said, needing to break the tension. "For 3 months. My maid smuggled them in and out. I still have every one." Adrian moved to his desk and opened a drawer, withdrawing a bundle of yellowed papers tied with black ribbon. "I have read them so many times that I have memorized them. Your thoughts on Shakespeare, your opinions on the Reform Act, your descriptions of your mother's garden before she died. Everything." Cecilia's throat tightened. "I burned yours. After you married. I could not bear to keep them." "I know. I would have done the same." Adrian set the letters down carefully, as though they were made of glass. "Do you remember when we decided to run away together?" How could she forget? It had been April, the city fragrant with spring blossoms, and they had met in Hyde Park for what was supposed to be a properly chaperoned walk. Her maid had been bribed to lag behind, giving them a few precious moments of privacy. "You told me your father was pressuring you to marry Lady Madeline," Cecilia said. "That he had arranged it when you were children, and that honour demanded you fulfill the contract. I told you I did not love her, that I could not imagine spending my life with anyone but you." Adrian's voice roughened. "And you said, 'Then do not marry her. Marry me instead.'" The words came back to her with painful clarity. "We will go to Scotland. We will wed over the anvil. Your father cannot force you if we are already married." "It was madness," Adrian said. "Complete madness. You had no money. I had duties and responsibilities I could not simply abandon. But I did not care. For the first time in my life, I chose something for myself. I chose you." They had planned it carefully, or so they thought. Adrian had arranged for a carriage to collect Cecilia 3 nights later, at midnight, when the household slept. They would drive through the night to the coast, take rooms at an inn, and continue north to Gretna Green the following day. The first part had gone perfectly. Cecilia had slipped from her father's house wrapped in a dark cloak, carrying a single bag of belongings. Adrian had been waiting with the carriage, and the moment she stepped inside, he had pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a desperation that spoke of months of restrained longing. "We stopped at Hartmouth," Cecilia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You said the horses needed rest, but really, I needed to hold you somewhere that was not a moving carriage, where I could see your face properly and convince myself this was real." Adrian's eyes met hers. "We took rooms at the Anchor Inn, separate rooms because even in my madness, I would not compromise you before we were wed." But they had not stayed in separate rooms, not entirely. They had sat up all night in Adrian's chamber, talking and laughing and stealing kisses that grew progressively less innocent as dawn approached. The next day, they had walked along the beach, and Adrian had taken her hand and said, "This place is ours now, our secret, our Seabourne," mispronouncing the nearby village of Eastbourne in his exhaustion. "Seabourne," Cecilia had repeated, loving the sound of it. "Our private kingdom." They had stayed 3 days instead of 1, unable to tear themselves away from the small paradise they had created. 3 days of freedom, of being simply Adrian and Cecilia, rather than Duke and Lady's daughter, 3 days before reality had caught up with them in the form of Cecilia's father and Adrian's solicitor, both furious and both determined to end the madness before it could be legitimized. "Your father dragged you away," Adrian said, his voice tight with old pain. "I tried to stop him, but you begged me not to make a scene, not to give them more ammunition against you. He locked me in my room for 3 months," Cecilia said. "Told society I had gone to nurse a sick aunt in Cornwall. When I finally emerged, you were already married to Lady Madeline." Adrian flinched as though she had struck him. "My father was dying. I did not know it then, but he had perhaps a month left. He called me to his bedside and told me that if I did not honour the betrothal, he would die, knowing I had destroyed our family's honour. He said the Somerset name would be dragged through scandal, that Lady Madeline's family would sue for breach of contract, that everything our family had built would crumble because I was selfish enough to choose love over duty." "So you chose duty," Cecilia said flatly. "I chose cowardice." Adrian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I told myself I was being noble, sacrificing my happiness for the greater good. But the truth is, I was terrified of scandal, of disappointing my dying father, of the responsibility of choosing my own path. So I married Madeline 3 weeks later, and my father died 2 weeks after that, and I spent the next 7 years living in a prison of my own making." "Was she truly unhappy?" Cecilia asked, surprising herself with the question. "Lady Madeline?" Adrian's expression grew infinitely sad. "She was a good woman, kind, intelligent, everything a duchess should be. But she knew from our wedding night that I loved another. I did not tell her your name, but she knew, and it destroyed something in her, knowing that her husband would never truly be hers. You said she died in childbirth. The baby came early. A son." Adrian's voice broke slightly. "He lived for perhaps an hour, long enough for me to hold him, to see that he had her dark hair and my eyes, and then he simply stopped breathing, as though he knew there was no place for him in this world. Madeleine followed him 3 days later. Infection, the physician said. But I think she simply gave up." Cecilia found her eyes burning with unexpected tears. "Adrian, I'm so sorry. Before she died, she made me promise something." Adrian crossed to his desk again, this time removing a sealed letter. "She said that if there was any way to find you, to make things right, I should do it. She said that life was too short to live without love, and that she forgave me for not being able to love her as she deserved." He held out the letter, and with shaking hands, Cecilia took it. The seal was unbroken, the direction written in a feminine hand she did not recognize. "That is for you," Adrian said. "From Madeleine. She wrote it the day before our son was born. I do not know what it says, but she made me swear to give it to you if I ever found you." Cecilia stared at the letter, unable to process the weight of what she held. A dead woman's words, written to the woman her husband had truly loved. 3 years ago, I hired a solicitor named Mr. Dalton to find you," Adrian continued. "I gave him what little information I had. He searched for months with no success. Your father had moved you from London, and no one seemed to know where the Fairmont family had gone. But Mr. Dalton is nothing if not persistent. Last week, he came to me with news. He had finally located you through a connection at your father's club, and what he told me made my blood run cold." Adrian retrieved a folder from his desk and handed it to Cecilia. She opened it with trembling fingers and found sheaves of paper covered in neat handwriting, gambling vowels in her father's hand. Letters between Lord Creighton and Lady Marguerite Fairmont. A marriage contract dated 3 days hence. "Lord Creighton is not merely cruel," Adrian said as she read. "He is dangerous. Mr. Dalton discovered that his previous 3 wives all died within a year of marriage, each in suspicious circumstances. The first fell down the stairs, the second drowned in her bath, the third ate something that disagreed with her and died of what the physicians called apoplexy, but what anyone with sense would call poison." Cecilia's hands trembled so badly that the papers rustled. "Why has he not been charged? Because he is wealthy, powerful, and careful. Because society prefers not to examine too closely when a man of his standing loses his wives. Because until now, no one has had the motivation to look deeply enough. Adrian's voice hardened. Mr. Dalton has been investigating for the past week. The evidence is damning, but not yet sufficient to bring charges. That is why, when I received his report yesterday evening and realized that you were meant to marry Creighton in 3 days, I rode out at dawn to try to find you. I thought perhaps I could speak with your father, offer to pay the debts. I never imagined I would find you on that cliff. If you had been 10 minutes later, Cecilia whispered. Do not. Adrian crossed to her in 3 strides and knelt before her chair, taking her cold hands in his. Do not think of that. You are here, you are safe, and I swear to you on everything I hold sacred that Lord Creighton will never touch you. Cecilia looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his tanned skin against her pale fingers, and felt something break open inside her chest. 10 years of carefully maintained anger, 10 years of telling herself she hated him, and all of it crumbled beneath the weight of his devotion. Why did you not fight for me then? She asked, her voice breaking. 10 years ago, when it might have mattered. Because I was a coward, Adrian said simply. And I've spent every day since then paying for that cowardice. I am fighting for you now, Cecilia. If you will let me, if there is any part of you that can forgive what I did, what I failed to do. She should pull her hands away. She should hold on to her anger like a shield. But Cecilia Fairmont was so very tired of being angry, so tired of being alone. Show me the rest, she said instead. Show me everything Mr. Dalton found. Adrian's eyes searched hers for a long moment. Then he nodded and rose to retrieve more documents from his desk. As he laid out the evidence of her father's debts, of Lord Creighton's scheme, of Lady Marguerite's involvement, Cecilia felt her anger shift from Adrian to those who truly deserved it. By the time the mantel clock struck noon, Cecilia understood the full extent of the web that had been woven around her. And she understood something else as well. Adrian Somerset had spent 3 years and a small fortune searching for her, had loved her through a loveless marriage and beyond death itself. Perhaps, just perhaps, some things were worth the risk of believing in again. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, when the library doors opened to admit a slight, bespectacled man carrying a leather case that appeared far too heavy for his frame. Mr. Dalton, Adrian's solicitor, bowed to them both before setting his burden upon the desk with evident relief. Your Grace, Miss Fairmont, he greeted them, his sharp eyes taking in Cecilia's borrowed clothing and the tea things that suggested she had been at Winterbourne Manor for some hours. I apologize for the interruption, but I have obtained additional materials that require immediate attention. What have you found? Adrian asked, rising from his seat near the fireplace where he had been explaining the finer points of his investigation to Cecilia. Mr. Dalton opened his case and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with red ribbon, handling them as though they were venomous serpents. These arrived by courier this morning from a contact in London. They are correspondence between Lord Creighton and Lady Marguerite Fairmont, spanning the last 18 months. My contact, a clerk in Creighton's household who has reason to bear his master ill will, liberated them at considerable personal risk. Cecilia stood abruptly, her teacup rattling against its saucer as she set it down. My stepmother has been corresponding with Lord Creighton for 18 months. Indeed, Miss Fairmont, and the contents are most illuminating. Mr. Dalton spread the letters across the desk surface. They detail not merely an affair of the heart, though that is certainly present, but a carefully orchestrated scheme of manipulation and murder. Adrian moved to stand beside Cecilia as she approached the desk, close enough that she could feel the heat of him at her shoulder. Together they read, and with each letter, Cecilia felt her blood grow colder. The earliest letters were innocuous enough, flirtatious correspondence between a widow and a man of means. But as the months progressed, the content grew darker. References to the Fairmont problem and removing obstacles peppered the pages. By autumn of the previous year, the plan had crystallized with damning clarity. Upon our marriage, Creighton had written in November, you may rest assured that your stepdaughter's unfortunate demise will be arranged within 6 months, leaving you as sole beneficiary of the Fairmont properties through your husband's natural grief and subsequent incapacitation. Cecilia's hands trembled as she read her own death sentence, laid out in elegant penmanship as casually as one might discuss the weather. "There is more," Mr. Dalton said quietly. He withdrew another document, this one yellowed with age. This letter dates from 12 years past. It was found among Lady Marguerite's private papers by the same clerk. It appears she has been planning her ascension to the Fairmont fortune for quite some time. 1. The letter was addressed to an apothecary in London, requesting a supply of white arsenic in quantities that could not possibly be justified for any legitimate purpose. The date was 3 weeks before Cecilia's mother had died. "She killed my mother," Cecilia whispered, the words feeling strange and distant in her mouth, as though spoken by someone else entirely. "All these years, I thought it was an accident. She fell down the stairs. That is what we were told. Falls may be arranged, Mr. Dalton said with grim delicacy, particularly if the victim is first weakened by slow poisoning, making her dizzy, unsteady on her feet. Adrian's hand found the small of Cecilia's back, steadying her as the room tilted around her. "How long had Lady Marguerite been in your household before your mother's death?" 8 months. Cecilia forced the words past the tightness in her throat. "She came as a companion after my mother's health began to fail. My father hired her because she had excellent references and experience nursing invalid ladies. Invalid ladies who presumably died under her care," Mr. Dalton observed, making a note in his ever-present ledger. "I shall investigate her previous positions immediately." "No." The word emerged more forcefully than Cecilia had intended, surprising them both. She straightened, pulling away from Adrian's touch, though it cost her to do so. "No more investigation without action. Mr. Dalton, you have gathered evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, of actual murder in the past, and of ongoing fraud. Why has Lord Creighton not been arrested? Why does my stepmother still walk free?" Mr. Dalton exchanged a glance with Adrian before answering carefully. "The evidence, while compelling, is not yet sufficient to guarantee conviction. A man of Lord Creighton's standing would retain the finest barristers in England. Without witnesses willing to testify, without physical proof of the arsenic poisoning, we have only letters that he could claim were forgeries or products of an overactive imagination. So we need a confession," Cecilia said. The idea had been forming in her mind as she read the letters, taking shape with each damning line. "We need them to incriminate themselves beyond any doubt." Adrian's expression darkened. "Cecilia, whatever you are thinking, I am thinking that in 3 days' time, I am meant to marry Lord Creighton," she interrupted, turning to face him fully. "The contracts are signed, the arrangements made. What if I do not flee? What if I appear to accept my fate?" "Absolutely not." Adrian's voice held the ring of ducal command. "You are not putting yourself in that man's power for any reason." "I would not actually marry him," Cecilia said impatiently. "But if he believes the wedding will proceed, if Lady Marguerite believes her plan is succeeding, they may become careless. They may say or do something that gives us the proof we need." "It is too dangerous," Adrian insisted. "We will find another way." Cecilia felt anger spark in her chest, bright and cleansing. "Another way that leaves me dependent upon you. Another way that makes me a victim to be protected, rather than a woman capable of securing her own justice. I have spent 10 years being helpless, Adrian. I will not spend another day in that state." The challenge hung between them, and Cecilia watched as Adrian struggled with his instinct to protect her, warring against his recognition of her right to choose her own path. "Miss Fairmont raises a valid point," Mr. Dalton ventured cautiously. "If she were to confront her father first, to understand the full scope of Lady Marguerite's hold over him, we might learn information that would aid our case considerably." "I will accompany you," Adrian said, compromise clear in his tone, if not his expression. "If you insist on confronting your father, I will not let you face him alone." Cecilia considered refusing on principle, but pragmatism won out. "Very well, but I will lead the conversation. I will not have my father intimidated into silence by your presence." They made the journey to Fairmont House in Adrian's carriage, Cecilia still wearing the borrowed green dress. Mr. Dalton accompanied them, his case of evidence tucked carefully under his arm. No one spoke during the 20-minute drive. each lost in their own thoughts. Fairmont House, when they arrived, looked even more decrepit than Cecilia remembered. The gardens were overgrown, the paint peeling from the window frames, the entire structure sagging slightly, as though exhausted by the weight of years of neglect and misfortune. The butler who answered the door, old Simmons, started visibly at the sight of Cecilia. "Miss Cecilia, we thought, that is, your father said, you had taken ill and were confined to your chambers." "My father says many things," Cecilia replied, sweeping past him with Adrian and Mr. Dalton in her wake. "Where is he?" "In the study, miss, but Lady Marguerite is with him, and they specifically requested not to be disturbed." Cecilia did not wait for him to finish. She knew these hallways as well as she knew her own reflection, could have walked them blindfolded. She moved through the familiar corridors with grim determination, aware of Adrian's presence behind her like a solid wall of support. She did not knock before entering her father's study. The door swung open to reveal Viscount Fairmont hunched behind his desk, looking 20 years older than his actual age of 55. Lady Marguerite stood at his shoulder, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of concern that did not reach her cold eyes. Both looked up in shock as Cecilia entered, followed by a duke and a solicitor. "Cecilia!" Her father half rose from his seat. "What are you doing here? I received word this morning that you had run away, that you were seen heading toward the cliffs." "Oh, I was heading toward the cliffs," Cecilia confirmed, her voice icy calm. "I was going to throw myself off them rather than marry Lord Creighton. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately for some, the Duke of Winterbourne intercepted me." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression of maternal concern did not waver. "My dear girl, how dramatic. Surely you cannot mean such things. The wedding is only 3 days away. You should be at home preparing, not gallivanting about with—" Her gaze slid to Adrian with barely concealed disdain. "Gentlemen who ought to know better than to compromise a young lady's reputation." "Her reputation is the least of my concerns," Adrian said coldly. "As is yours, madam." "Father," Cecilia said, focusing all her attention on the broken man behind the desk. "I know about the letters. I know about the plan. I know that you have sold me to a murderer so that your mistress may inherit what little remains of our family fortune after you are conveniently disposed of as well." The colour drained from Viscount Fairmont's face. "Cecilia, I can explain. Can you explain Mother's death as well?" Cecilia withdrew the ancient letter from Mr. Dalton's case and placed it on the desk. "Can you explain why Lady Marguerite was purchasing arsenic 3 weeks before Mother fell down those stairs? Or were you unaware that your beloved mistress poisoned your first wife?" "That is absurd," Lady Marguerite snapped, her mask of concern finally cracking. "These are the wild accusations of a desperate girl trying to avoid her obligations." "These are documented facts," Mr. Dalton corrected, stepping forward to lay out the letters one by one. "Correspondence between yourself and Lord Creighton. A clear conspiracy to commit murder. Multiple murders, in fact." Viscount Fairmont stared at the letters as though they were written in a foreign language. His hands shook as he reached for one, then pulled back as though burned. "Marguerite, tell me this is not true. Tell me you did not, that Sarah did not—" "Your wife was dying anyway," Lady Marguerite said dismissively, abandoning pretense now that concealment seemed pointless. "I merely hastened the inevitable. She was weak, Henry. She would have dragged you down with her. I saved you. You murdered her." The words burst from Viscount Fairmont with the force of years of suppressed grief and guilt. "You murdered my Sarah, and God help me, I helped you. I stayed silent because you said you had proof of my debts, of my frauds, that you would expose me if I did not cooperate. And you believed her," Cecilia said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. "You let her kill Mother, and then you stood by while she planned to kill me as well. For what, father? For money? For her affection? I am sorry." Tears streamed down the Viscount's weathered face. "Cecilia, I am so sorry. I was weak. I was frightened. She said if I did not agree to the marriage with Creighton, she would destroy me, destroy our name. I told myself you would be safe, that Creighton would treat you well. You knew." Cecilia said flatly. You knew what he was, what he had done to his previous wives. You knew, and you gave me to him anyway. The accusation hung in the air, damning and irrefutable. Viscount Fairmont buried his face in his hands, broken sobs shaking his thin shoulders. Lady Marguerite, seeing her carefully laid plans crumbling, made a desperate play. None of this matters. The contracts are signed. The wedding will proceed as planned, or Henry will be arrested for fraud before nightfall. I have sent copies of his illegal dealings to 3 separate magistrates, to be opened if I do not personally countermand the order by tomorrow morning. Then we shall all go to the magistrates together, Adrian said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You may destroy the Viscount, madam, but I will ensure you hang for murder. The choice is yours. For a long moment, Lady Marguerite simply stared at him, clearly calculating her odds. Then, with a speed that took them all by surprise, she lunged for the desk, grabbed a letter opener, and held it to Viscount Fairmont's throat. No one moves, she commanded, her beautiful face twisted with fury. Or I will open his throat here and now. Cecilia felt time slow to a crawl. Adrian tensed beside her, clearly preparing to act. Mr. Dalton had gone pale, his hand moving toward his coat where he presumably kept some sort of weapon. But it was Cecilia who moved first. Do it, she said calmly, taking a step forward. Kill him. Add another murder to your list. It will make your conviction that much more certain. Cecilia! Her father gasped against the blade. He is weak. He is complicit. And he traded my life for his comfort, Cecilia continued, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. If you think I will beg for his life, you are mistaken. But know this, Lady Marguerite, if you harm him, there will be nowhere on earth you can hide from the consequences. The Duke of Winterbourne has resources you cannot imagine, and I will personally ensure that you suffer for every life you have destroyed. The threat was not empty, and Lady Marguerite knew it. Cecilia could see the calculation in her eyes, could see the moment she realized she had already lost. Slowly, Lady Marguerite lowered the letter opener. This is not over, she hissed. Yes, Adrian said quietly, stepping forward to take the weapon from her slack grip. It is. Within the week, Lady Marguerite Fairmont stood before a magistrate to answer charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud. The evidence Mr. Dalton had gathered, combined with the dramatic confrontation at Fairmont House and testimony from Lord Crichton's terrified household staff, proved overwhelming. She was sentenced to transportation to a penal colony in Australia, a fate she accepted with cold-eyed fury. Lord Crichton himself fled to France the moment he learned of Marguerite's arrest, but Adrian's connections ensured he would find no peace there. French authorities, persuaded by carefully worded diplomatic pressure and the testimony of 3 former servants who had witnessed his treatment of his late wives, arrested him within a fortnight. He would stand trial in England for murder. Viscount Henry Fairmont faced no criminal charges, having cooperated fully with the investigation and provided testimony against his former mistress. But the social consequences were swift and merciless. The Tun, which had tolerated his gambling and his debts, could not forgive his complicity in a murder plot against his own daughter. Adrian's solicitors handled the financial arrangements with ruthless efficiency. The Duke paid Fairmont's substantial debts in full, but the price was steep. Viscount Fairmont signed over all remaining properties to Cecilia, retaining only a modest annuity sufficient for basic living expenses. He would retire to a small cottage in Scotland, far from London society and the daughter whose forgiveness he did not deserve. Cecilia stood in the study of what was now her London townhouse, watching through the window as her father's carriage departed. She felt nothing, not anger, not grief, not relief, just a vast emptiness where her family should have been. He asked if you would write to him, Adrian said quietly from the doorway. He had maintained a respectful distance throughout the legal proceedings, offering support but never pressing for more than she could give. What did you tell him? Cecilia did not turn from the window. That the choice was yours to make, not mine. She finally looked at him then, this man who had saved her life, who had avenged her mother, who had restored her fortune and her independence. He looked tired, she thought. The past week had aged him, worry etching new lines around his mouth. I do not know what I feel. she admitted. He is my father. He is also a coward who would have let me die. How does one reconcile such things? I do not know, Adrian said honestly. My own father was not an easy man to love. He valued duty above all else, including the happiness of his son. I grieved when he died, but I also felt relieved, and the guilt of that relief haunted me for years. Cecilia moved away from the window, toward the desk, where documents transferring ownership of 3 properties sat waiting for her signature. She was wealthy now, by most standards. Not ducal wealth, but enough to live comfortably, to choose her own path. You have been generous, she said, gesturing to the papers. More than generous. You have given me everything I thought lost. I have given you what was always rightfully yours, Adrian corrected. Your father's debts were not yours to bear. The properties came through your mother's family. They should have passed to you upon her death. Instead, they passed to the man who allowed her murder. Cecilia's voice was flat. I find I cannot feel charitable toward him, Adrian. Perhaps that makes me a terrible person. It makes you human. Adrian moved closer, though he still did not touch her. Cecilia, there is something I must ask you, something that cannot wait any longer. She looked up at him, saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his expression. What is it? May I court you? The words came out in a rush, as though he had been holding them back for days. Properly, openly, as I should have done 10 years ago. Not to protect you, or out of guilt or obligation, but because I love you, and I want the chance to prove it. Cecilia's breath caught. She had known this moment would come, had been half dreading, half hoping for it. Adrian, I do not know if I can be what you remember. That girl who ran away with you to Seabourn, she was young and foolish and believed in fairy tales. I am not her anymore. I know, he said gently. And I am not the boy who was too frightened to fight for her. We are different people now, Cecilia. Older, perhaps wiser, certainly more scarred. But I find that I love the woman you have become even more than I love the girl you were. How can you know that? She challenged. You have spent a week arranging my legal affairs. You have been my champion and my protector. But we have not truly been together. We have not talked of anything beyond debts and trials and revenge. Then let us talk of other things, Adrian proposed. Let me take you to dinner. Let me escort you to the theatre. Let me simply spend time with you without the shadow of murder and conspiracy hanging over us. And if, at the end of it, you decide that what we shared 10 years ago cannot be reclaimed, I will accept your decision. But please, give me the chance to try. She should refuse. She should protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But Cecilia had spent a week watching Adrian work tirelessly on her behalf, had seen the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, had felt the gentle care in every word and deed. Very well, she said finally. You may court me, but I have conditions. Name them. I will not be a passive participant in my own life again, Cecilia said firmly. The properties I now own, I intend to transform. I want to establish a school for young women of fallen families, to give them education and options I never had. I will need your advice on the practical matters, but the vision must be mine. Agreed, Adrian said without hesitation. What else? If I discover at any point that you are courting a memory rather than a woman, I will end this. I will not compete with a ghost, even if that ghost is my younger self. Fair enough. Anything else? Cecilia took a breath. Take me to Hartmouth. To the real Hartmouth, not the idealized Seabourn of our memories. I need to see if what we shared can exist anywhere other than in the past. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or fear. But he nodded. When would you like to go? Tomorrow, she said. I do not want time to talk myself out of it. They made the journey in Adrian's travelling carriage, with Cecilia's new maid as chaperone. The weather was fine, the roads dry, and the countryside beautiful in the late summer sunshine. Adrian pointed out landmarks as they passed, told her stories of the region, made her laugh with observations about the absurdities of country life. It felt natural, Cecilia realized with some surprise. Not forced or awkward, but easy in a way few things had ever been easy with another person. Hartmouth itself was much as she remembered. a small coastal village that made its living from fishing and the occasional traveller seeking respite from London's chaos. The Anchor Inn still stood at the edge of the village green, though the paint was more faded and the sign creaked ominously in the breeze. Adrian helped her down from the carriage, and together they walked toward the beach where they had spent those 3 stolen days a decade ago. The sand was the same, the sea was the same, but the world had changed, and so had they. "It is smaller than I remembered," Cecilia said, looking out over the waves. "Less magical." "Or perhaps we have grown too large for it," Adrian suggested. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him but not quite touching. "We built this place into something it could never be. A paradise, a sanctuary, a solution to all our problems. But it was only ever a village by the sea." Are you saying we were fools to run here?" Cecilia asked. "I am saying we were young," Adrian replied. "And youth sees possibilities that age knows to be impossible. But Cecilia, look at me." She turned to face him, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "I do not love you because of 3 days in Hartmouth," Adrian said. "I do not love the memory of a girl I knew when we were both too young to understand what love truly meant. I love the woman who stood up to murderers, who faced down her father's betrayal with courage, who thinks of helping other women before she has even finished helping herself. That is who I see when I look at you. Not the past, the present, and if you will allow it, the future." Cecilia felt something break open in her chest, some last defense she had been holding on to. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to believe you, afraid to trust this, afraid that if I let myself hope, I will be destroyed when it fails." "Then we will be afraid together," Adrian said, and finally, he reached out and took her hand. "Because I am terrified as well. Terrified that I have already lost you, that 10 years is too long a gap to bridge, that you will wake up one day and realize you deserved better than a man who failed you when it mattered most." Their fingers intertwined, and Cecilia marveled at how right it felt, how perfectly his hand fit around hers. "What do we do now?" she asked. Adrian smiled, and it transformed his face from severe to beautiful. "We take it one day at a time. We court properly, slowly, with no secrets and no running away. And we see if what we feel now is strong enough to build a life upon. And if it is not, then at least we will know we tried," Adrian said. "But Cecilia, I believe it is. I believe we are." She looked at him. This man who had loved her through a marriage to another woman, through years of separation, through death and grief and scandal. And she made a choice. "So do I," she said. And when Adrian pulled her into his arms, when his lips met hers in a kiss that tasted of salt air and second chances, Cecilia felt something she had not felt in 10 long years. Hope. The weeks that followed blurred into a strange, breathless interlude. There were papers to sign, properties to be assessed, servants to reassure and dismiss. There were visits to solicitors and magistrates, endless interviews with men in wigs who spoke of justice and precedent, while Cecilia tried to remember how to breathe. Through it all, Adrian was there, not hovering, not smothering, but steady as a lighthouse on a storm-lashed coast. Whenever she faltered, he was the hand at her elbow, the quiet voice reminding her that this time she was not facing ruin alone. 2 months had passed since Marguerite's sentencing, and the London townhouse that would become Cecilia's school no longer smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. It smelled of beeswax and leather-bound books, of lavender sachets tucked into desk drawers, and of the future. Cecilia stood in what Mrs. Alton had taken to calling the Great Room, watching workmen install the last of the bookshelves. Sunlight streamed through newly cleaned windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. In 6 weeks, 12 young women would walk through the front door and begin the education that might save them from the fate Cecilia herself had narrowly escaped. "The chimney draws well," Mrs. Alton observed, appearing at her elbow with that uncanny ability housekeepers possessed to materialize exactly when needed. "The girls will be warm enough come winter." "Good." Cecilia ran her hand along the smooth surface of a desk. "I want them to feel safe here, comfortable, Not like guests in someone else's house, but like this place belongs to them. Ambitious, Mrs. Alton said, though there was approval in her tone. Most schools for young ladies teach them to be ornamental. You intend to teach them to be formidable. I intend to teach them to survive, Cecilia corrected. Whether they choose to be formidable is their own affair. She had interviews scheduled for the following week. Daughters of impoverished gentlemen, girls whose families could not afford London seasons, young women who'd been told their prospects were dim simply because their dowries were non-existent. Cecilia had met with each family personally, had looked into the eyes of girls who reminded her painfully of her younger self. Adrian had accompanied her to several of these meetings, though he had been careful to let her lead the conversations. His presence lent weight to her endeavour, his ducal authority opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. But he never presumed to speak for her, never suggested he knew better than she did what these girls needed. It was, Cecilia thought, the most valuable gift he could have given her, the space to be competent. Miss Fairmont, a footman announced from the doorway. The Duke of Winterbourne has arrived. Cecilia felt the familiar flutter in her chest, the one she had tried and failed to suppress. Show him to the small parlour. I will join him momentarily. She took a moment to check her reflection in the glass that hung above the mantelpiece. The borrowed gowns had been replaced by dresses made to her measurements, paid for with her own funds. The one she wore today was a deep green that brought out the colour of her eyes, practical in its cut but elegant enough for receiving visitors. She found Adrian standing by the window of the small parlour, his dark head bent over a book he had pulled from one of the shelves. He looked up as she entered, and the warmth in his blue eyes made her pulse quicken. "You have excellent taste in literature," he said, holding up a volume of Byron's poetry. "Though I confess I am surprised to find such scandalous verse in a school for young ladies." "They are not children," Cecilia replied, closing the door behind her. Propriety be damned. They had moved beyond the need for constant chaperones. "And I will not insult them by pretending passion does not exist. Better they read Byron and understand what they feel than stumble blindly into situations they cannot control." Adrian set the book down carefully. "You are going to scandalize half of London." "Only half?" Cecilia smiled. "I must be doing something wrong." He crossed to her then, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood soap he favoured, could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. What he withdrew made Cecilia's breath catch. It was a small leather box, worn at the edges, the kind that held something precious. "Adrian, it is not what you think," he said quickly. "Or rather, it is precisely what you think, but I am not presenting it in the way you might expect. May I?" She nodded, unable to form words. Adrian opened the box to reveal a ring. A simple gold band set with a single emerald, the stone clear and bright in the afternoon light. "This belonged to my mother," he said quietly. "My father gave it to her on their wedding day. It is not grand, not compared to the Winterbourne jewels, but she wore it every day of her marriage. She told me once that she valued it above all her other adornments because it represented a choice freely made." Cecilia stared at the ring, her throat tight. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to have it," Adrian said. "Not as a betrothal ring, not yet, but as a symbol of what I hope for. A choice freely made, Cecilia. When you are ready, if you are ever ready." She looked up at him, saw the vulnerability in his expression, the fear that she might refuse even this small gesture. "You are asking me to hold on to your mother's ring?" "I am asking you to hold on to the possibility," he corrected. "To know that when you look at it, someone loves you enough to wait. Someone believes you are worth the waiting." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "Adrian, I do not know what to say." "Say you will take it," he urged gently. "Say you will keep it safe until the day you either give it back to me or allow me to place it on your finger. No pressure, no demands, just possibility." Cecilia reached out and took the box from his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. The ring caught the light, throwing green sparks across the walls. "I will keep it safe," she said. "But I cannot promise when or if I will be ready to wear it." "I know." Adrian's hand came up to cup her cheek. his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. Take all the time you need. I have already wasted 10 years. I can wait as many more as it takes for you to trust me again. I do trust you, Cecilia said, surprised to find it was true. That is what frightens me. I trusted you once before, and it nearly destroyed me when you left. I know, Adrian said again, his voice rough with emotion. And I cannot promise that I will never disappoint you, never fail you in smaller ways. But I can promise that I will never choose duty over you again. I can promise that if you give me your heart, I will guard it with my life. Cecilia closed the box and held it against her chest, feeling the weight of it, the significance. I need to see Hartmouth again, she said suddenly. Not as we did before, when everything still reeked of courts and scandal and fear. I want the real Hartmouth, not the fantasy we built around it. I need to know if what we feel can exist now, with the worst behind us, outside of crisis and memory. Adrian nodded slowly. When would you like to go? Tomorrow, she said, before I lose my courage. They made the journey with Dr. Helena Pritchard as chaperone, the physician having become an unexpected ally in Cecilia's endeavours. Helena sat across from them in the carriage, her sharp eyes missing nothing, as Adrian and Cecilia maintained a careful distance from one another. You are both being remarkably proper, Helena observed as they left London behind. It is almost suspicious. We are conscious of your presence, Adrian replied dryly, and of propriety. Propriety, Helena repeated with a snort. You are a duke, travelling with an unmarried woman to a coastal village where you once attempted to elope. I think propriety abandoned this carriage somewhere around the first posting in. Cecilia felt laughter bubble up despite her nerves. You have a gift for stating uncomfortable truths, Helena. It is the physician in me, Helena said cheerfully. We are trained to notice symptoms others prefer to ignore, and the symptoms I observe suggest two people very much in love and very much afraid to admit it. Helena, Cecilia protested weakly. Oh, do not trouble yourself to deny it. I have eyes. Helena pulled a book from her bag and opened it decisively. I shall read now and pretend not to notice anything that occurs. Within reason, of course. I do have some standards. Adrian caught Cecilia's eye, and they shared a look of mingled amusement and exasperation. His hand found hers in the space between them, hidden by the folds of her skirt, and she did not pull away. Hartmouth looked smaller than Cecilia remembered, shabbier somehow. The Anchor Inn still stood at the edge of the village green, but the paint was more faded than it had been 10 years ago, and one of the shutters hung at an odd angle. The beach beyond was the same grey shingle she remembered. The sea, the same restless presence. They took rooms at the inn, Helena claiming the largest for herself, with the air of a chaperone who intended to take her duties seriously. Adrian and Cecilia stood in the small parlour that connected their chambers, the space awkward with memory and hope. It is different, Cecilia said finally, looking out the window at the village below. We are different, Adrian replied. We were children playing at being adults. Now we are adults trying to remember what it felt like to be young. She turned to face him. What if there is nothing left? What if Seabourn only existed because we were desperate and foolish? Then we will know, Adrian said. And we will decide what comes next based on truth rather than fantasy. Is that not what you wanted? It was. Cecilia had spent 2 months watching Adrian support her work without trying to control it, had seen him step back when she needed space and step forward when she needed strength. She had seen him patient and kind and unfailingly respectful of her autonomy. But she needed to know if the heat she felt when he looked at her, the ache in her chest when they parted, was born of gratitude and proximity, or of something deeper. Walk with me, she said, to the beach, to the place where we promised each other forever. They descended to the shingle beach as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Helena followed at a discreet distance, her book tucked under her arm, a silent guardian of propriety. The wind was fierce, as it had always been, tearing at Cecilia's hair and whipping Adrian's coat around his legs. They walked to the water's edge, where the waves crashed and retreated in their eternal rhythm. Do you remember what you said to me here? Cecilia asked, raising her voice to be heard over the wind. I said many things, Adrian replied. Most of them foolish declarations of eternal devotion. You said that no matter what happened, this place would always be ours. That we could come back in thought, if not in body, and find each other here. I remember. Cecilia turned to face him fully, the wind pushing her back toward him. I tried to come back here in thought 1,000 times over the years, but I could never find you. The place felt empty without you in it. Adrian's expression softened, because I was not here. I was in a marriage I did not want, mourning a woman I had lost, trying to convince myself that duty was enough to build a life upon. And now? She asked. Now that we are both here, what do you feel? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the restless sea and back again. I feel that Hartmouth was never what mattered. The village, the beach, the romance of running away together. None of it was the point. The point was you. And you are standing in front of me now, real and present, and more remarkable than any memory could ever be. Cecilia felt the last of her defences loosen, as if the careful walls she had mortared around her heart had finally begun to crack in the salt-laden wind. I am afraid, she whispered. I know, Adrian said, moving closer. Close enough now that she could feel the heat of him despite the wind's chill. I am afraid too. But Cecilia, I would rather spend the rest of my life being afraid with you than spend another day being certain and alone. She looked up at him. This man who had saved her life, who had avenged her mother, who had given her back her future, and asked for nothing in return except the chance to love her. And she realized that she had been wrong. Hartmouth had not been empty without him. She had been empty without him. Ask me, she said. Adrian's eyes widened. Cecilia. Ask me, she repeated, her voice stronger now. Here, in this place that was ours. Ask me properly. He took both her hands in his, and she felt them trembling. Cecilia Fairmont, will you marry me? Not because I saved you, not because of what we once were, but because I love the woman you have become, and I want to spend the rest of my life watching you change the world. Yes, she said, and the word felt like freedom. Yes, I will marry you. Adrian pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, Cecilia tasted salt from the sea and from her own tears. The wind howled around them, the waves crashed at their feet, and somewhere in the distance, Helena discreetly turned her back to give them privacy. When they finally broke apart, Adrian kept his hands cradling her face, his breath still mingling with hers. I have the ring with me, he said. Would you like to wear it now? Not yet, Cecilia replied. Take me back to London first. Let me open my school, see my first students through their first month. Then, when I have proven to myself that I can build something lasting, ask me to wear it. Adrian smiled, and it transformed his entire face. As you wish, though I warn you, I may ask you every day until you agree. I will hold you to that, she said, and kissed him again. They returned to London 3 days later, and the announcement of their betrothal appeared in the papers the following morning. Society, which had been speculating for months, received the news with a mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. There would be no more scandal, no more whispered speculation, only a duke and the woman he had chosen. Cecilia's father wrote from Scotland. A brief letter congratulating her and expressing a hope that she might one day forgive him enough to attend the wedding. She read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. Someday, perhaps, she would write back, but not today. Today, she had a school to prepare and a future to build, and for the first time in 10 years, that future included the man she loved, standing beside her rather than in her way. The announcement appeared in the Morning Post 3 days after their return from Hartmouth. The Duke of Winterbourne is pleased to announce his betrothal to Miss Cecilia Fairmont, daughter of Viscount Fairmont. The marriage will take place in 2 months' time at the Duke's country seat. Society's reaction was swift and divided. Some whispered that it was romantic, a love rekindled after years apart. Others muttered about a fallen woman snaring a duke through clever manipulation. Most simply shrugged and moved on to fresher scandals. Cecilia cared for none of it. She had work to do. The school opened its doors exactly 4 weeks after the betrothal announcement. 12 young women crossed the threshold of the London townhouse on a crisp October morning, their expressions ranging from hopeful to terrified. Cecilia greeted each one personally, remembering their names, their circumstances, the particular desperation that had brought them to her door. "This is your home now," she told them in the great room, where they had assembled for the first time. "Not a prison, not a place where you will be moulded into acceptable ornaments. You are here to learn how to protect yourselves, how to understand the world that seeks to use you as bargaining chips." Miss Harriet Pembroke, 17 and sharp-eyed, raised her hand. "Will we learn to read contracts as the prospectus suggested?" "You will," Cecilia confirmed. "You will learn enough law to understand marriage settlements, property rights, and inheritance. You will learn to keep household accounts so that no husband or steward may cheat you. And yes, you will also learn French and music and drawing, because society will expect it of you." "What if we do not wish to marry?" asked another girl, her voice small but determined. Cecilia smiled. "Then you will learn skills that might allow you to support yourselves. I cannot promise you fortunes or easy paths, but I can promise you choices." Adrian attended the opening day, standing quietly at the back of the room as Cecilia addressed her students. When she caught his eye, he smiled with such pride that her heart stuttered in her chest. Later, when the girls had been shown to their rooms and the household had settled into its new rhythms, Adrian found Cecilia in the small library. "You were magnificent," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "What if I fail them? What if this school becomes just another gilded cage?" Adrian crossed to her and took her hands in his. "Then you will learn from that failure and do better. Cecilia, you cannot protect them from everything, but you can give them tools to protect themselves. That is more than most women in their position will ever receive." She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers intertwined with hers. "I have been thinking about your mother's ring." His breath caught. "Have you?" "I would like to wear it," she said. "Not as a symbol of waiting or possibility, but as a promise. I am ready, Adrian. I am ready to be your wife." The joy that transformed his face was almost painful to witness. He released her hands, only long enough to pull the small leather box from his pocket, the one he apparently carried with him always now. The emerald ring caught the lamplight as he withdrew it. "May I?" he asked, and she extended her left hand. The ring slid onto her finger as though it had been made for her. Cecilia stared at it, at the green stone that had once adorned a duchess who had chosen love freely, and felt the weight of promise settle over her. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I think I never stopped, even when I tried to hate you." "I love you," Adrian replied, pulling her into his arms. "And I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of that love." They announced the date officially the following week, December 23rd, at Winterbourne Manor. A winter wedding, intimate and private, with only close friends in attendance. The backlash was immediate and vicious. Society matrons who had daughters to marry off were incensed that the Duke had chosen a woman with so little to recommend her. Anonymous letters arrived at the townhouse, some merely insulting, others threatening. One suggested that Cecilia would meet the same fate as Adrian's first wife, if she presumed to take a duchess's coronet. Adrian dealt with the worst of it, using his considerable influence to ensure that the perpetrators understood there would be consequences for continued harassment. But some arrows found their mark regardless. It was during one particularly difficult week, when 3 fathers had withdrawn their daughters from the school under pressure from their wives, that Viscount Henry Fairmont arrived at the London townhouse unannounced. Cecilia received word of his presence in the entrance hall with a mixture of dread and something that might have been curiosity. She had not seen her father since he departed for Scotland 3 months prior. The letters had continued, brief and humble, but she had answered none of them. "Show him to the small parlour," she told the footman. "I will join him shortly." She took a moment to compose herself, to build the armour she would need for this conversation. When she finally entered the parlour, she found her father standing by the window, his back to her. He had aged visibly in 3 months. His hair was more grey than brown now. His shoulders stooped as though bearing an invisible weight. "Father," she said, and he turned. "Cecilia." His voice was rough with emotion. "You look well. More than well. You look happy." "I am," she replied, not moving from the doorway. "What are you doing here?" "I came to ask your forgiveness," he said simply, "and to beg you not to exclude me from your wedding." The request hung in the air between them. Cecilia felt the old anger rise, felt the urge to wound him as he had wounded her. But she also saw, with painful clarity, a broken man who had lost everything through his own weakness. "I do not know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever. What you did, what you allowed to happen, I know." He held up a hand to stop her. "I know what I did. I traded your life for my comfort. I stood by while Marguerite poisoned your mother. I was a coward and a fool, and I have paid for those sins with the loss of everything I held dear." "You have not lost everything," Cecilia pointed out. "Adrian ensured you would have enough to live comfortably. Adrian ensured I would have enough to survive," her father corrected. "There is a difference. Cecilia, I did not come here to make excuses or to beg for your pity. I came to tell you that I am proud of what you have built, of the woman you have become despite my failures, and I came to ask if there might be someday a place for me in your life, not as the father I should have been, but as something, anything you are willing to give." Cecilia studied him. This man who had read to her by the fire when she was young, who had let her mother die, who had tried to sell her to a murderer. He was all of these things at once, contradictions that could not be reconciled. "I will allow you to attend the wedding," she said finally, "but you will sit at the back, and you will not approach me unless I invite it. After that, we will see. I make no promises, Father. You burned through my trust years ago. If you wish to earn even a fraction of it back, you will have to accept that it may never happen." Relief flooded his weathered features. "Thank you. That is more than I deserve." "Yes," Cecilia agreed. "It is." After he departed, she stood alone in the parlour for a long time, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger, the responsibility of the school above her head, the complexity of forgiveness that might never be complete. Adrian found her there an hour later, still standing by the window. "Your father came," he said. It was not a question. "He asked to attend the wedding. I said yes." She turned to face him. "Was that a mistake? That depends on what you hope to gain from it." Adrian said carefully, "If you hope for reconciliation, for the father you once had to miraculously reappear, then yes, it may be a mistake. But if you simply want to allow him the grace of witnessing your happiness from a distance, then it is an act of mercy." "I am not feeling particularly merciful," Cecilia admitted. "Then call it pragmatism," Adrian suggested, crossing to her. "He is your father. Denying him completely gives him power over you, makes him a wound that cannot heal. Allowing him limited access on your terms lets you control the narrative." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "When did you become so wise about family complications?" "When I spent 7 years married to a woman I did not love while pining for the one I lost," he said. "I learned that some relationships are messy and imperfect, and that is acceptable as long as we are honest about what they are." Cecilia closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I want our marriage to be different. I want it to be honest and equal and built on something more than obligation." "It will be," Adrian promised, "because we have both learned what it costs when it is not." The remaining weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. The school found its rhythm, the girls settling into their studies with an enthusiasm that surprised even Cecilia. Dr. Helena Pritchard proved to be an excellent teacher, her medical knowledge lending credibility to lessons on anatomy and health that would have scandalized most finishing schools. Adrian divided his time between London and Winterbourne, preparing the manor for the wedding while still maintaining his parliamentary duties. He and Cecilia saw each other daily, sometimes for hours, sometimes for mere moments, but always with the certainty that this was temporary, that soon they would not have to part at all. One evening, Exactly 1 week before the wedding, Adrian arrived at the townhouse with a package wrapped in brown paper. A gift, he explained, handing it to her. Though perhaps not the traditional sort. Cecilia unwrapped it to reveal a leather-bound ledger, its pages blank and waiting. A journal. A record, Adrian corrected. I thought you might wish to document the school's progress, the girls who pass through these doors, the lives that are changed here. Someday, when we are old and grey, you can look back and see what you built. She ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of it. You give the best gifts. I give the gifts I think you will actually use, he said. Jewels and gowns are beautiful, but you would rather have something with purpose. He knew her, Cecilia realized, truly knew her, not as a memory or an ideal, but as the complicated, ambitious, sometimes difficult woman she had become. And he loved her anyway. 1 week, she said softly. 1 week, Adrian agreed, pulling her close. And then you will be stuck with me for the rest of our lives. I can think of worse fates, Cecilia said, and kissed him. The week before the wedding brought challenges Cecilia had not anticipated. A faction of conservative society matrons, led by the formidable Lady Hartfield, mounted a campaign to prevent several families from attending. Letters circulated, questioning Cecilia's suitability, her scandalous past, her unseemly ambition in establishing a school. They say you are unfit to be a duchess, Helena reported one afternoon, tossing the latest anonymous letter onto Cecilia's desk. Apparently, teaching girls to read legal documents is tantamount to treason against the natural order. Cecilia read the letter with detached interest. They are afraid. Women who understand contracts cannot be cheated. Daughters who can read law will question settlements. I threaten everything they have built their lives upon. And you will continue regardless, Helena stated, rather than asked. I will continue regardless, Cecilia confirmed. Adrian dealt with the worst of the opposition, through channels Cecilia did not ask about. Invitations that had been declined were suddenly accepted. Families who had wavered found themselves receiving personal visits from the Duke himself. By the time they departed for Winterbourne Manor, the guest list was restored. The manor itself had been transformed. Evergreen boughs decorated every doorway. White roses filled the chapel despite the December cold, and fires roared in every grate. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, had outdone herself. Cecilia arrived 2 days before the ceremony, Helena and 3 of her students accompanying her as attendants. The girls' eyes widened at the grandeur of the estate, at the realization that their teacher was to become mistress of all this. Will you still run the school? Miss Harriet Pembroke asked quietly as they toured the grounds. Of course, Cecilia replied. Did you think marriage would make me forget my purpose? Some ladies do, Harriet said. Once they have secured their position. Then those ladies did not understand their purpose to begin with, Cecilia said firmly. I am not marrying Adrian to secure a position. I am marrying him because I love him, and because he supports what I am building rather than seeking to control it. The evening before the wedding, as was tradition, Viscount Henry Fairmont arrived. Cecilia watched from an upper window as his modest carriage pulled up to the servants' entrance rather than the main door. A small mercy, she thought. At least he understood his place. She received him in the library, Helena present as chaperone, though Cecilia suspected she needed no protection from this diminished man. You came, Cecilia said. You invited me, her father replied. He looked older still, the journey from Scotland having taken its toll. I would not have missed it for anything. I have something for you. Cecilia withdrew a small wooden box from her desk. Mother's jewellery. What little Marguerite did not sell. I thought you might want it. Henry Fairmont took the box with trembling hands. When he opened it to reveal a simple pearl necklace and matching earrings, tears streamed down his weathered face. She wore these on our wedding day, he whispered. I had thought them lost forever. Adrian's investigators found them in a London pawn shop. He purchased them and returned them to me. Cecilia paused. I cannot wear them tomorrow. They belong to a daughter whose father protected her mother. I am not that daughter. The words were cruel, but Henry did not flinch from them. No, You are a daughter who survived despite her father's failures. That makes you far stronger than the girl I might have raised. I brought another gift as well. Henry withdrew an envelope from his coat. Letters from your mother, written to you before she died. Marguerite hid them. I found them when clearing her belongings after her arrest. Cecilia's hands shook as she took the envelope. Inside were 3 letters in her mother's familiar hand, addressed to my dearest Cecilia. Read them after the wedding, her father suggested gently. Let tomorrow be about your future, not my failures. After he departed to the rooms Adrian had arranged for him in the village inn, Cecilia sat alone with the letters. She broke the seal on the first, despite her father's advice. My dearest Cecilia, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I pray you have found happiness despite the sorrow of my loss. There are things I must tell you, truths about your father that may help you forgive him when the time comes. She read all 3 letters through the night, tears streaming down her face as her mother's voice spoke across the years. Sarah Fairmont had known she was being poisoned. She had suspected Marguerite but could not prove it. She had written these letters as both warning and comfort, as a mother's last attempt to protect the daughter she would never see grow up. Your father is weak, the final letter concluded. But he loved me in his fashion, and he loves you more than he knows how to show. When the time comes, if you can find it in your heart, give him grace. Not forgiveness necessarily, but grace. Let him witness your happiness from a distance. It is more than he deserves, but less than he needs, and sometimes that is the kindest gift we can give. Dawn broke cold and clear over Winterbourne Manor. Cecilia had not slept, but she felt strangely peaceful as Helena and her students helped her dress. The gown was simple by Duchess standards, white silk without excessive ornamentation, chosen because it allowed her to move freely and breathe deeply. You look beautiful, Helena said, arranging the veil. Though I suspect the Duke would marry you in sackcloth if that were the only option. He very nearly did marry me in a travelling dress, Cecilia reminded her. 10 years ago, in a foolish flight to Gretna Green. And now he marries you properly, before God and society, with all the authority of his position behind you, Helena said. That is growth, Cecilia. For both of you. The chapel at Winterbourne Manor was small, built in the previous century to serve the family and estate workers. Evergreen boughs and white roses transformed it into something ethereal. Candlelight dancing across stone walls that had witnessed 100 years of Somerset family celebrations. Adrian stood at the altar in formal attire. Mr. Dalton beside him as groomsman. When Cecilia entered on Helena's arm, the look on his face was worth every moment of doubt, every sleepless night, every fear that happiness might still be snatched away. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, but when Cecilia spoke her vows, she meant every syllable. I, Cecilia Sarah Fairmont, take you, Adrian Charles Somerset, to be my husband, not my master, not my saviour, but my partner in all things. Adrian's vows were equally pointed. I, Adrian Charles Somerset, take you, Cecilia Sarah Fairmont, to be my wife, not my property, not my obligation, but my equal in all things that matter. The vicar raised an eyebrow at the unconventional additions, but continued nonetheless. When he pronounced them man and wife, Adrian pulled Cecilia into his arms and kissed her with a fervour that made the small congregation chuckle. Finally, he whispered against her lips. Finally, you are mine, and I am yours. We always were, Cecilia replied. We simply needed 10 years to understand what that meant. The breakfast following the ceremony was intimate. Only 30 guests gathered in Winterbourne's dining room. Cecilia looked around the table and saw the careful selection of people who had supported her rebuilding. Dr. Pritchard, Mrs. Alton, Mr. Dalton, several fathers whose daughters attended her school, and in the far corner, almost hidden, Viscount Henry Fairmont. Their eyes met across the room, and Cecilia saw hope flicker in her father's expression. She raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement. Not quite a toast, but not quite a dismissal either. Grace, her mother had written. Not forgiveness, but grace. That evening, as the last guests departed and the household settled into quiet, Adrian found Cecilia on the terrace overlooking the gardens. She wore a heavy cloak against the December cold, but she seemed reluctant to go inside. "Regrets?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "None," she said. "Though I confess I feel strange. For 10 years I was Miss Fairmont, defined by my father's failures and my family's debts. Now I am the Duchess of Winterbourne, and I have no idea what that means." "It means," Adrian said, taking her hand, "that you have resources to expand your school, influence to protect the women who need protection, a partner who will stand beside you as you change the world one educated girl at a time." "And what does it mean for you?" Cecilia asked. "You could have married anyone, Adrian. Someone without scandal, without ambition, without a past that complicates everything." "I could have," he agreed. "And I would have been miserable. Cecilia, you are not a complication. You are the solution to a problem I have carried for 10 years. How to live a life that matters rather than simply existing within expectations." She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the certainty of his presence. "My father gave me letters from my mother tonight. She knew Marguerite was poisoning her. She wrote to warn me, to help me understand." "What did she say?" Adrian asked gently. "That my father was weak but not evil. That he loved us even though he failed us. That I should give him grace if I could manage it." Cecilia looked up at the stars scattered across the winter sky. "I allowed him to attend today. I acknowledged him. It was the best I could do." "It was more than many would have done," Adrian said. "And if someday you can give him more, then you will. And if you cannot, that is acceptable too." They stood together in the cold until Mrs. Winters appeared with pointed reminders about the evening growing late and propriety being satisfied by the marriage itself. Adrian swept Cecilia into his arms and carried her across the threshold of his chamber, their chamber now, to the delighted gasps of watching servants. "This is highly improper," Cecilia protested, laughing. "We are married," Adrian reminded her. "Propriety no longer applies." And as he set her down gently and pulled her into his arms, as he kissed her with 10 years of longing, finally allowed free rein, Cecilia thought that perhaps, just perhaps, happiness was not something to be feared, but something to be claimed. Fiercely, wholly, without apology. 2 years had passed since Cecilia became the Duchess of Winterbourne, and the transformation was complete. Not merely of her circumstances, but of herself. She stood in the nursery of Winterbourne Manor on a crisp autumn morning, watching her twin daughters play with wooden blocks on the carpet. Margaret and Sarah, named for her mother and Adrian's, had inherited their father's dark hair and their mother's green eyes. At 18 months, they were fearless, curious, and entirely unimpressed by titles or expectations. "Mamma!" Margaret declared, holding up a crooked tower. "Look!" "Beautiful," Cecilia said, kneeling to admire the architecture. "Shall we build it higher?" The school in London had expanded beyond anything she had imagined that first desperate year. 7 properties now, scattered across England, each filled with girls learning to read contracts, manage estates, understand law, and protect themselves from the fates that had nearly claimed Cecilia herself. 150 young women educated annually, sent back into society armed with knowledge that made them dangerous to those who preferred women ignorant and compliant. Dr. Helena Pritchard had published her treatise on trauma and recovery to considerable acclaim. The medical establishment was divided, some embracing her ideas, others dismissing them as radical nonsense. Helena did not care. She had patients to treat and students to teach, and the opinions of stuffy old men in London clubs held no interest for her. Adrian had become a force in Parliament, proposing reforms that protected women's property rights, that made contracts more transparent, that punished men who used marriage as a weapon against helpless daughters. He faced opposition at every turn, but he was relentless, patient, and impossible to ignore when he held the floor. Together, they had become something society had not anticipated, partners who refused to be diminished by tradition. Cecilia received the letter from Scotland on a Tuesday afternoon while reviewing applications for the new school opening in Surrey. The handwriting was unfamiliar, a local physician's cramped script, informing her that Viscount Henry Fairmont was dying and asking for her. She read the letter twice, feeling nothing, then everything at once. Anger that he dared ask for her presence. Guilt that she felt angry. Relief that the complicated tangle of their relationship would soon be resolved by death. Shame at feeling relieved. "You should go," Adrian said that evening when she showed him the letter. "Not for him. For yourself." "I do not know what I would say to him," Cecilia admitted. "Perhaps nothing," Adrian suggested gently. "Perhaps you simply need to see that he is mortal, fallible, finished, that he no longer has power over you." She made the journey alone, travelling by rail to Inverness and then by hired carriage to the small cottage where her father had lived these past 2 years. It was tidy, well kept, surrounded by the wild beauty of the Scottish Highlands. A far cry from the decaying grandeur of Fairmont House. The physician met her at the door. "He is weak, Your Grace, but conscious. He has been asking for you daily." Cecilia found her father in a simple bed near the window, thinner than she remembered, his breathing laboured. His eyes opened when she entered, and something like peace crossed his weathered features. "Cecilia," he whispered. "You came." "I came," she confirmed, sitting in the chair beside his bed. "Though I am not certain why." "To say goodbye," he said, "or perhaps to finally tell me what you think of me. I would welcome either." She looked at him, this man who had failed her in every way that mattered, and found that the anger she had carried for so long had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding perhaps. Recognition that he was simply human, weak and flawed, and capable of both love and terrible cowardice. "I think you loved my mother," Cecilia said finally. "I think you loved me, but you loved yourself more. And when it came to choosing between your comfort and our safety, you chose yourself every time." "Yes," he agreed simply. "I did. I cannot forgive you," she continued. "Not fully, but I can acknowledge that you have lived these past 2 years in exile, that you asked for nothing beyond what was necessary, that you respected the boundaries I set. That is more than I expected of you. It is more than I deserved." Her father's hand trembled as he reached for a box on the bedside table. "I have something for you. Letters from your mother. The ones I gave you before your wedding. There were more. I wanted to save them, to give them to you over time. But I fear time has run out." Cecilia took the box, felt its weight. "Why did you keep them from me?" "Because they contained her forgiveness of me," he said quietly. "And I was ashamed to show you that she had been kinder to me than I deserved. Read them after I am gone. Let her speak to you one final time." He died 3 days later, peacefully, with Cecilia reading to him from a book of poetry he had once read to her as a child. She arranged for a simple burial in the local churchyard, attended the service with the physician and 2 neighbours who had befriended the quiet, broken man from England. When she returned to Winterbourne, she found Adrian waiting at the entrance, their daughters in his arms. "It is finished," she said simply, and he understood. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Cecilia opened the box of letters. There were 12 in all, written by her mother during the months before her death. Sarah Fairmont had known she was being poisoned. She had suspected Marguerite, and she had forgiven her husband for his weakness, even as she begged him to protect their daughter. "He is not a strong man," one letter read, "but he is not evil. When I am gone, he will need you more than you need him. Be kind if you can manage it, Cecilia, not for his sake, but for your own. Bitterness is a poison more deadly than arsenic." Cecilia wept for the mother she had lost, for the father she had never truly had, for the girl she had been standing on that cliff edge believing death was the only escape. She wept until Adrian found her and held her, asked no questions, simply offered the steady presence she needed. The school continued to flourish. By their 3rd anniversary, graduates were establishing their own institutions, teaching other women the skills Cecilia had given them. The ripple effect was undeniable. Slowly, painfully, the world was beginning to shift. Marguerite died in the penal colony in Australia, bitter and forgotten. Lord Crichton had been dead for 2 years, his name synonymous with cruelty and corruption. The villains of Cecilia's story had met their ends without drama or fanfare, simply fading from relevance as the world moved forward without them. One autumn afternoon, when the girls were napping and Adrian was in his study attending to correspondence, Cecilia walked to the cliffs where her story had so nearly ended. The waves crashed below, eternal and indifferent. The wind whipped her hair just as it had that desperate morning when she had stood here in her nightgown, ready to step off the edge. Adrian found her there, as he had known he would. He stood beside her without speaking, simply offering his hand. "Do you ever think about it?" Cecilia asked. "About what would have happened if you had not ridden out that morning? If you had not shouted that word?" "Every day," Adrian admitted. "And every day I am grateful that I did." Cecilia looked out over the water, at the place where despair had nearly claimed her. "I'm not grateful for the pain. I am not grateful for what my father did, or what Marguerite tried to do, but I am grateful for this. For you, for our daughters, for the work I have built. Pain has purpose if we allow it to transform us rather than destroy us. You have transformed more than yourself," Adrian said. "You have transformed the world for every girl who walks through your school's doors." They stood together as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Behind them, Winterbourne Manor glowed with lamplight, filled with laughter and life and the promise of tomorrow. Cecilia thought of the girl she had been, desperate and hopeless. She thought of the woman she had become, strong and purposeful. She thought of the daughters who would grow up knowing they had choices, that they could be more than ornaments or bargaining chips. "Seaborn," she said softly, speaking the word that had saved her life. "Seaborn," Adrian repeated, understanding that she was not talking about a place, but about transformation, about choosing life over death, about refusing to be destroyed by circumstances beyond one's control. They returned to the manor hand in hand, leaving the cliffs behind. There was work to be done, children to raise, a school to expand, a world to change one educated woman at a time. The past was finished. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and built on foundations of trust, partnership, and the stubborn insistence that love could survive anything if both people chose to fight for it. And Cecilia Fairmont Somerset, who had once stood on the edge of oblivion, now stood at the centre of her own remarkable life, grateful for every hard-won moment of it.